The evening bled across the Wyoming plains in a hush of crimson light, the kind that made the land seem endless and haunted all at once. Wind moved through the tall grass like a whispered secret. Dust rose from the hooves of Elias Boone's mare as he returned from the northern ridge, where he'd been checking a broken fence post. The day had been long and wordless, just him, the wind, and the faint creak of leather when he shifted in the saddle. That was how he preferred it. Silence was a kind of companion now. The ranch lay at the edge of nowhere, a small cabin of pine and weathered dreams, surrounded by a sea of golden wheat and low hills. Elias swung down, brushed the dust from his coat, and led his horse into the corral. The air was heavy with the promise of rain. Clouds had rolled in from the west, dark and swollen. His old hound, Copper, lay under the porch, tail thumping once as he passed. The world felt still, too still, the way it did before thunder split it open. He just stepped onto the porch when Copper's ears lifted. A low growl rumbled from the dog's throat. Elias froze. Out beyond the corral, where the land sloped into shadow, something moved. It wasn't the wind. The movement was slow, stumbling, like a drunk or a wounded animal. Elias reached for the rifle propped by the door and peered into the growing dark. Lightning flickered on the horizon. In that brief wash of white, he saw her. A figure collapsed beside the gate, dress torn, hair plastered to her face with mud and rain. The image was gone in an instant, swallowed by the night. But it was enough. He set down the rifle and moved fast, boots sinking into the wet earth as the first drops of rain began to fall. When he reached her, the storm had broken fully, wind whipping, rain cutting like glass. The woman lay half-conscious, her breath shallow, her lips bloodless. A wedding dress clung to her like a ghost of the life she'd fled. One of her sleeves was ripped away, revealing bruised skin beneath. Mud streaked the ivory fabric. He bent low and touched her shoulder gently. "Ma'am," he said, voice low but firm. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, gray eyes dulled by shock. She tried to speak, but only managed a broken whisper, a sound like a name that never formed. When she heard the distant echo of hooves, she tensed, her whole body trembling as if in terror. Elias turned his gaze toward the plains, but the darkness showed nothing now, only wind and rain. Whoever she feared had ridden far. "Easy now," he murmured. "Ain't no one here but me." She shivered violently, rain pooling beneath her, fingers clutching at the dirt as though she were afraid of being pulled under. He lifted her in his arms. She was light, almost too light. The scent of wild roses and dust clung faintly to her dress, faded now, but still there, like a memory of something gentle in a world gone harsh. Carrying her through the rain, he pushed into the cabin, nudging the door shut with his boot. The room glowed with the dim orange light of a half-dead fire. He laid her carefully on the bed by the hearth, grabbed a quilt from the chair, and wrapped it around her trembling frame. She was cold, colder than the rain outside. He stirred the fire back to life, the flames reflecting off the wet silk of her gown. She looked like she'd come from some faraway world that didn't belong out here, too delicate for the grit and wind of the frontier. But the blood on her temple, the dirt on her hands, told another story. She had fought to survive. Elias sat beside the bed, unsure what to do next. He hadn't had a soul in his cabin since the winter his wife and boy had died. The silence, since then, had become his only company. But now it felt different, charged, fragile. Copper whined low from the doorway, uneasy, as if sensing the weight of something that had crossed their threshold. The woman stirred again, mumbling words he couldn't make out. He poured a bit of water into a tin cup and held it to her lips. She drank weakly, eyes half closed. "You're safe here," he said, though he wasn't sure she believed it, or that he did. When she drifted back into a restless sleep, Elias leaned back and watched the storm dance against the window. Thunder rolled through the valley like the growl of an old god. He wondered who she was, where she had come from, and who had left her to die in a wedding gown. There was no ring on her finger, just a pale band of skin where one had been. He found a locket around her neck, tarnished but finely made, the kind no ranch girl would wear. Inside was the image of a man, sharp-featured, proud, the kind of face that didn't belong to a good man. Elias closed it and set it aside. Outside, the rain turned to mist, and the smell of wet earth filled the cabin. He poured himself coffee, black and bitter, and sat in the rocker across from the fire. Every creak of the wood floor felt louder than usual. He didn't like mystery at his door. The world was cruel enough without inviting its ghosts inside. But when he looked at her, pale against the firelight, one hand clutching the quilt as though afraid it might disappear, he knew he couldn't turn her out. At some point, exhaustion claimed him. He dozed in the chair, hat pulled low. The fire crackled, thunder faded, and the only sound left was the soft, uneven breathing of the stranger. Near dawn, Copper barked again, sharp warning. Elias was on his feet before he even knew he'd moved. He stepped outside, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the horizon. The sky was still dark, streaked with the fading storm. Then he saw them, hoof prints, fresh and deep, leading from the east and stopping at his gate. Beyond that, they vanished into the rain-washed dirt. He crouched low, touching the mud. The prints were from 2 horses, maybe 3. Whoever had brought her here hadn't meant for her to live. He followed the trail a short distance until it dissolved in the riverbed. Nothing but silence now. When he returned to the porch, dawn had begun to break, a thin line of gold on the horizon. He wiped the mud from his hands and looked toward the cabin window. Through the glass, he saw her sitting up, staring at the fire. Her eyes were clearer now, but filled with something he recognized too well, the kind of sorrow that had no end. He stepped inside quietly. She flinched at the sound of the door, but didn't speak. For a long moment, neither did he. Then gently he asked, "You got a name, miss?" She hesitated, fingers clutching the edge of the quilt. Her voice came small and raw, like something scraped from stone. I don't remember." It was a lie. He could hear it, but he didn't press. Out here, a lie was sometimes the only thing keeping a soul alive. "Rest easy," he said instead. "You're safe for now. Storm's gone." Her eyes flickered toward the window, where the wind still rattled the shutters. "No," she whispered. "It isn't." He didn't ask what she meant. He just nodded, set another log on the fire, and sat near the door. Outside, the world was waking. The call of a crow, the scent of damp sagebrush, the hum of life beginning again. But inside, the air felt suspended, as if time itself was holding its breath. She drifted back to sleep, and he watched her quietly, the light from the fire tracing the soft lines of her face. The dress, though torn, still shimmered faintly. He couldn't help wondering what kind of man would drive a bride into the wilderness to die. The rain had settled into a whisper by morning, the kind that made the world seem soft and far away. Inside the cabin, the fire still glowed low, painting the walls with the color of old amber. Elias Boone sat beside the bed, rolling a strip of clean cloth between his calloused hands. The woman, who had given him no name, and perhaps had none left, was burning with fever. Her skin gleamed with sweat, her breath shallow, uneven. He soaked the cloth in water and pressed it gently to her forehead. Her lashes fluttered, though she didn't wake. He spoke softly, not knowing if she could hear. "You're safe. Rest easy now." The sound of his own voice startled him. It had been years since he'd spoken more than a few words to anyone. The cabin had forgotten speech. It felt strange to fill it again. He wrung the cloth, wiped the dirt from her hands, her arms, the streak of dried blood along her temple. His fingers were clumsy, too used to tools and reins to know the gentleness required here. But he moved with care, each touch deliberate. When he finished, he sat back, rubbing the tension from his neck. The fire hissed softly, a log shifting. Outside, the storm had broken fully. The air smelled of wet pine and smoke. The quiet was almost holy. Hours passed. He brewed coffee, mended a torn saddle strap, checked the corral through the rain-streaked window. But his mind kept drifting back to the woman in his bed. Sometimes she murmured in her sleep, words half-formed. Once she said, "Run. Another time, please." And it made something deep in his chest twist. By evening, the fever hadn't broken. Elias rummaged through an old wooden chest, found a tin of herbs left by his late wife, feverfew, willow bark. He crushed them, steeped them in boiling water, and held the cup to the woman's lips. "Drink." he whispered. "You'll need your strength." She obeyed weakly, the tremor of her throat visible as she swallowed. When she drifted back to sleep, he placed the cup aside and sat by the hearth, staring into the flames. He remembered the last time he'd cared for someone sick. His wife, Mary. The fever had come fast then, too, taking her and the boy within days. He had buried them under the cottonwood by the creek, the same one he now avoided when the wind turned from the east. Since then, the cabin had been nothing but wood and silence. But now, the same silence carried the rhythm of another's breathing, and it unnerved him. On the second morning, sunlight broke through the clouds, gold and gentle. The woman stirred, eyes opening slowly as though from a long nightmare. She blinked at the beams of light, at the rough cabin walls, at him sitting quietly by the door. For a moment, she seemed uncertain whether this was heaven or some in-between place. He rose and crossed the room, slow and careful, as though approaching a wild animal. "You're awake." Her gaze darted around, then back to him. Where am I?" "Boone Ranch," he said. "Few miles west of the river. You were found near my gate." She tried to sit up, winced, and sank back against the pillow. "I remember rain. And hooves. Then nothing. You collapsed in the storm," he said. "Could have frozen if I hadn't seen you." Her fingers found the edge of the quilt, gripping it tightly. "Did anyone come after me?" Elias studied her face. "No one since." "Why would they?" Her lips parted, but no answer came. Instead, her eyes filled with something that looked like fear and shame mixed together. He didn't press further. Out here, questions could be dangerous things. He poured her a cup of warm broth, helped her sit upright enough to sip it. She thanked him with a hoarse whisper. Her voice was fragile, like wind brushing over glass. As she ate, she glanced at him often, quick, nervous looks, as if weighing the man who had brought her here. Elias was tall, broad-shouldered, his beard touched with gray, eyes the color of river stone. There was nothing cruel in his face, but it carried the heaviness of loss. He looked like a man who'd buried more than he'd spoken of. When she finished, he took the cup and set it aside. "You should rest more." "I've rested enough," she said, trying to pull the quilt aside, but the effort left her shaking. "I need to go." He stopped her gently. "You go anywhere in that state, you won't make it a mile." She turned her face away, breathing fast. He could see the pulse at her throat, could see how her eyes lingered on the window as though expecting something, or someone to appear. "I don't even know your name," he said. "It's better that way." "Maybe," he said quietly, "but I like to know who I'm saving." Her eyes softened at that, just for a heartbeat, but she said nothing more. That night, she slept without fever for the first time. Elias sat outside beneath the eaves, rolling a cigarette he didn't light. The moon rose pale and cold, casting silver over the valley. Somewhere an owl called, long and low. He could feel the land breathing, the same rhythm it always had, but now it felt different, as though the cabin had taken in something living again. In the following days, she grew stronger. Her voice steadied, though her past remained veiled. She spent her waking hours watching the light through the window, her expression distant. Sometimes he caught her tracing the line of a ring that wasn't there anymore. Elias kept busy. He chopped wood, repaired a section of fence, rode out to check on the herd. Each evening he returned to find her sitting by the fire, wrapped in his late wife's shawl. They spoke little, but silence between them felt less hollow now. Once, as he poured her tea, she said softly, "You don't ask much." "I've learned answers hurt worse than questions," he replied. She smiled faintly, then looked away. "You remind me of someone I used to know." "Was he kind?" "He was gentle, until the day he wasn't." The words hung in the air like smoke. Elias didn't pry. That night, the wind shifted again. He woke to the sound of her crying out. When he reached the bedside, she was thrashing beneath a blanket, whispering the same name over and over. "Gideon. Gideon, no, please." Her voice cracked, her hands clutching the air as though fighting someone unseen. Elias caught her wrists gently. "You're safe," he murmured. "Ain't nobody here but me." Her eyes flew open, wild and glassy, before she recognized him. The fight went out of her all at once. Tears spilled down her cheeks. He found me, she whispered. He'll find me again. He released her slowly. Who? She shook her head, trembling. Don't ask. Please. He sat on the edge of the bed, watching her breath steady. She turned toward the fire, her back to him. The shadows danced along the walls, flickering like memories that refused to die. After a long silence, she said, You should have left me where you found me. Elias's jaw tightened. I couldn't do that. Why? She asked bitterly. You don't even know who I am. Don't matter, he said. You were hurt. That's enough. She didn't answer, but her shoulders shook once, just once, before she lay still again. He sat there a long while, the fire's light fading to embers. When he finally stepped outside, dawn was still hours away. The stars hung low and cold above the valley. He walked to the edge of the porch and stared into the distance, where the land curved toward the river. In the faint silver light, something moved far off, a horseman, still as stone. Elias's hand drifted toward the rifle by the door. The rider didn't approach, only sat watching, the outline sharp against the rising mist.